Back in the summer of 1872, the sun beat down on the little town of Whiskey Ridge like it was trying to burn the map clean off. Just a scattering of buildings along a dry creek bed. The place looked peaceful enough, until you squinted and saw the cracks beneath the surface. Folks here worked hard, prayed harder, and whispered about the trouble brewing just beyond the horizon. That's when the boy showed up, barely 20, with a badge pinned to his chest and eyes like storm clouds rolling in. His name was Caleb Bryce. Folks called him the boy sheriff, mostly behind his back, though not out of spite. No, sir. It was just that they couldn't rightly believe someone so young had been handed the keys to the jailhouse and the peace of an entire town. But Caleb didn't let on none. He rode in on a roan Mustang named Whiskey and didn't say more than 10 words his first day. Just sat up in the office, dusted off the old wanted posters, and fixed the squeaky hinge on the cell door like he'd been born for the job. Weren't long before folks started to notice something peculiar. Calm settled over Whiskey Ridge. The gamblers at Ellie's saloon quieted their feuds, and even old Joe Tannen quit talking potshots at coyotes near the schoolhouse. Course, peace don't last long in these parts. Not when a man like Bart Lomax catches wind of a young sheriff garden, a town with nothing but dust and grit. Bart Lomax. Now there's a name that'll chill a man faster than creek water in January. An outlaw with a dozen deputies in the ground and a price on his head big enough to retire a whole cavalry regiment. Word was, Bart had a mean streak as wide as the Missouri and just as twisty. He rolled into Whiskey Ridge one day with 4 of his boys, mean-eyed men, all of 'em looking like they'd sooner shoot you than say good morning. The townsfolk saw the dust cloud rising and locked their doors tighter than a miser's purse. Ellie shut the saloon before supper. The preacher took to praying, loud enough to be heard from the church steps. Sheriff Bryce, though, he just stood on the porch of the jail, arms crossed, eyes steady. No rifle, no shotgun, just the 6-shooter slung low on his hip, the one he never touched in town but always kept clean as a hymn book on Sunday. Lomax dismounted, sneered through his beard, and spat tobacco near the jailhouse porch. "You the sheriff here, boy?" he asked. Bryce didn't flinch. "I am. You got any idea who I am?" "Reckon I do," said Caleb, voice even. "You're the man who thinks his name is louder than the law." That got a chuckle out of Lomax's boys. They thought it was going to be easy, see? One kid with a badge standing alone in a town with no marshal, no deputies. They figured this was a game of intimidation, that the sheriff would blink, maybe offer a bottle of whiskey and a promise to look the other way. But they didn't know. They didn't know about Carson's bluff, or the train robbery outside Elkhorn. They didn't know about the way Caleb drew his iron like he was pouring a glass of water, smooth, quick, and without a wasted motion. They didn't know that the only reason he was still alive, still breathing, still wearing that badge, was 'cause no man ever beat him to the draw, and they sure as sin didn't know that he was waiting for them to make their move. Bart Lomax didn't much care for being talked back to, especially not by a slip of a lawman standing on a porch like he owned the whole wide world. He squinted at Caleb, like he was sizing up a snake he couldn't quite tell was venomous or just foolhardy. "I reckon you best step aside, Sheriff," Bart growled. "We're just passing through, but we don't take kindly to obstacles." Caleb didn't move. His boots stayed planted firm on the porch boards, his thumbs resting lightly on his belt. "You pass through. You follow the law," he said, calm as a lullaby. "Ain't looking for trouble, but I ain't looking to run either." Now, most men might have paused then, might have seen the steel in Caleb's eyes, the quiet in his bones. But not Bart. No, he stepped closer, leaned in like a bear sniffing a challenge. "You're awful brave, boy. Brave or stupid. You really think you can stop me and my men?" Caleb's voice dropped low, like a whisper in a church. "No, but I reckon I only need to stop you." That was the crack that broke the silence. Bart's hand twitched toward his holster, but Caleb was already moving. No wind-up, no shout, just the clean hiss of leather and the thunder of a single gunshot. It all happened quicker in a blink. Bart staggered back, clutching his hand where the bullet had bit through the meat and bone. His pistol clattered to the ground. The look on his face was a mix of shock and fury, like he couldn't quite believe he'd been outdrawn, by a kid no less. His boys went for their irons next, but Caleb didn't flinch. With a flick of his wrist, he reloaded faster than seemed decent, and his voice rang out sharp. "You pull. You best be ready to fall." Something in that voice, low, level, full of ghosts, gave the outlaws pause. The man nearest the saloon door froze. The one by the horses took a half-step back. Only Jeb Slivermacaw, a wiry rattler with yellow teeth and a scar across his cheek, seemed fool enough to test the odds. He sneered. "Ain't nobody that fast." He was wrong. The second shot came quicker than the first. Sliver dropped, his shoulder torn clean through. He let out a howl and hit the dirt, writhen like a caught coyote. By then the others had holstered their irons. The fight was over before it began. Bart, still clutching his wounded hand, looked at Caleb with something close to respect and a heap more hatred. "This ain't over," he hissed. Caleb just looked at him. "It is for now." He pointed to the road. "You've got till sundown to get out of Whiskey Ridge. You ride back this way again," his eyes narrowed, colder than a January creek. "I won't aim for your hand." Bart spat blood, then turned, muttering curses under his breath. His men helped Sliver to his feet, and the gang mounted up, limping out of town like whipped dogs. The townsfolk emerged slow from their homes, like prairie dogs peeking out after thunder. Ellie leaned on the saloon door, her eyes wide with something between awe and worry. "You're going to have a price on your head now, Sheriff," she said softly. Caleb watched the dust trail disappear toward the hills. "Always did," he murmured. After Bart Lomax rode out, the wind seemed to shift over Whiskey Ridge, like the town was holding its breath. The folks nodded at Caleb a little slower, a little more deliberate. They weren't sure if they ought to thank him or mourn him. Caleb, for his part, didn't ask for gratitude. He just tipped his hat and walked back into the jailhouse, where the clock ticked slow and the walls held the heat like an oven. That night, Ellie stopped by with a plate of stew and a bottle of sarsaparilla. She didn't say much, just set it on his desk and lingered in the doorway. "They'll come back," she said after a spell. "I know," Caleb answered. "You gonna be ready?" He looked up, weariness etched deep in those storm-gray eyes. "Don't got the luxury of not being." Ellie nodded once and left, her boots echoing on the wooden walkway outside. Caleb sat there a long time, staring at the stew he didn't have the appetite for. He wasn't afraid of Bart Lomax. He was afraid of what would come with him. You see, trouble don't ride alone in the West. It rides in packs, in rumors, in the wake of old regrets. And Caleb carried his fair share. Late that night, when the moon was high and the air smelled of creosote and cold iron, a shadow rode into town. No noise but the creak of saddle leather and the soft clink of spurs. The rider dismounted by the livery and walked slow to the jailhouse. Caleb heard the footsteps before the knock. He reached for his pistol, not out of panic, just habit. The door creaked open, and in stepped a woman, tall, sharp-eyed, wrapped in a trail coat dusty from 1,000 miles of bad road. She had the look of someone who'd carved her name into more than one wanted poster. A pair of Colt Navy pistols rode low on her hips, worn from use. She tilted her head, studying Caleb. "You don't recognize me?" she asked. He did. Eventually. Took a beat, maybe two. Her hair was shorter, her face harder, but those eyes, they were the same. Hazel green and dangerous. "Lena," he said. She nodded once. "Been a long time, Sheriff." He didn't answer, just leaned back in his chair like someone gut-punched him slow. "You here to shoot me?" he asked after a minute. "If I was, you'd already be dead." That he believed. "What brings you to Whiskey Ridge?" She stepped forward, dropped a folded telegram on his desk. "He's paying for guns. Big money. Wants revenge." Caleb opened the note. Lomax's name was scribbled at the top. Beneath it, a list of men, killers, bounty hunters, deserters. Folks Caleb remembered from another life. From the war. From the days when he wasn't wearing a badge but a blood-soaked coat and a mask that didn't leave room for mercy. He looked up. "You riding with them?" She shook her head. "I was offered a spot. Turned it down." "Why?" Lena's smile was slow, sad. "Because once A boy with wild eyes and faster hands saved my life and told me I was worth more than blood money. Figured I owed him a warning. She turned to go, then paused. They'll be here in 3 days. 20 guns, maybe more. Caleb stood. Then I best get to work. Caleb Bryce didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch of the jailhouse, watching the stars poke holes through the darkness, that telegram weighing heavy in his coat pocket, like a stone dipped in guilt. Come morning, the town was already buzzing. News travels quick when there's gunmen on the wind. Ellie met him on the boardwalk, arms crossed, hair pinned back like she meant business. They say Lomax is coming with a whole outfit, she said, eyes flinty. Caleb nodded. 20 men, maybe more. Then why were you standing still? I ain't, he said. I'm thinking. That's different. She opened her mouth to argue, then shut it. She knew better. Caleb didn't rattle easy, and when he was quiet, it meant his mind was set 10 traps 2 steps ahead. He spent the next 2 days walking Whiskey Ridge like a preacher before a storm. Knocked on doors, spoke quiet with shopkeepers, ranch hands, even the schoolmarm. Told him the truth. Most listened. Some packed wagons and rolled out. Others stayed. Old men with Civil War muskets, farm boys with pitchforks and nerves made of thread. On the second night, the church bell rang 3 times slow. That was the signal. They were coming. Caleb stood in the middle of Main Street, his duster coat flapping in the wind, the sky painted in a red that made you wonder if heaven was about to bleed. He didn't wear a star that night, just the guns. Across from him, Lena stepped out of the shadows. You sure about this? She asked. Nope. Then why stay? He turned to her, a glint of firelight in his eye. Because they need someone who can. At sundown, the gang appeared on the ridge, like vultures circling a carcass. Lomax led the pack, his bandaged hand hanging limp, hate carved into every wrinkle of his face. Behind him came a chorus of killers, ex-soldiers, mercenaries, desperados, the kind of men who didn't bother to bury their dead. They rode in slow, horses kicking dust, rifles across saddles, laughter like broken glass. Lomax reined in first, sneered at the sight of Caleb standing alone. Thought you'd run by now, he called. Caleb stepped forward. You brought the wrong men. Lomax laughed. No, Sheriff. I brought the right ones. You just don't know it yet. But Caleb did know. He recognized 3 faces from an ambush in Kansas, another from a skirmish in the Colorado hills. Men he'd outgunned before. Some of them flinched at his gaze. Only one way this ends, Caleb said. Lomax spat. Then draw. But Caleb didn't. Not yet. He raised his voice instead, calm and loud. Every man who's got enough sense to leave. This is your last chance. A pause. Wind whistled through the canyons. Then a horse turned. One rider peeled off. Then another. A third. Lomax's snarl deepened. Cowards, he spat. No, Caleb said. They just remember what happens when I'm cornered. And then the guns came out. They say when the first shot rang out, it didn't sound like a gun. It sounded like fate. A single crack, clean as a church bell at noon, echoing down Main Street like the voice of judgment itself. It came from Caleb. His pistol moved faster than most folks could blink, and the first man dropped before he even cleared his holster. The second spun, cussing and grabbing his shoulder, already bleeding. Then the street exploded into fire and smoke. Lena ducked behind the water trough, her colts barking in tandem. 2 more riders hit the dust. One tried to flee but took a shot clean through the leg, fired by Miss Ellie herself, crouched on the saloon's rooftop with her daddy's old Winchester balanced on a crate of apples. Old man Crenshaw opened fire from his mercantile, his ancient musket belching smoke like a steamboat. It was chaos, beautiful, terrible, righteous chaos. Caleb moved through it all like a ghost wearing spurs, never in one place long enough to draw a bead on. His gun never jammed. His eyes never blinked. He wasn't shooting wild. He was Chu-Sin. Each shot was a name crossed off a dark ledger. Lomax fired twice, missed both, then took cover behind a buckboard wagon. Kill him, he roared. Kill that boy. But his gang was already broken. Half of them were dead or running. The rest had the wide-eyed look of men who'd finally realized they weren't fighting a boy in a badge. They were facing something else entirely. A storm. A legend. And legends don't die easy. Caleb slid behind a trough, breathing hard, blood trickling from a nick on his arm. Lena dropped beside him, teeth clenched. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "How many left?" "4. Maybe 5. He nodded again, calm as sunrise. "Time to finish this." With a roar, Caleb stepped into the open, both guns drawn. He didn't fire blind. He aimed, squeezed, and let the world tilt on its axis. 2 more outlaws fell. Another dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Then it was just Lomax. The outlaw stood alone now, eyes wild, blood on his sleeve, breathing like a man fastened the edge of a cliff. Caleb walked toward him slow, boots crunching over the spent shells and splintered wood. "Go ahead," Lomax growled, lifting his pistol. "Draw." But Caleb didn't. He holstered his gun. Lomax blinked. "What are you?" "I already won," Caleb said, voice low. "You pull that trigger, you'll be dead before you hit the dirt. But if you drop that iron and walk, you'll live to remember what happened here." Lomax's hand trembled. He looked at Caleb, looked at the dead around him. Then he let the pistol fall. It hit the ground with a hollow thud. Caleb nodded once. "Get out of my town." And just like that, it was over. When the dust settled and the gun barrels cooled, Whiskey Ridge looked like a war zone. Shell casings glinted in the dirt. A few windows were shot clean through. Blood painted the boards outside the saloon. And the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and something holy, like the truth had finally come calling. Caleb stood in the middle of it all, breathing steady, guns still holstered. The townsfolk began to emerge, eyes wide, voices hushed. A child tugged at his mother's skirt, pointing at the sheriff like he'd just watched a lightning strike walk upright. Lena leaned against a porch post, wiping blood off her cheek. "Well," she said, "you sure know how to throw a welcome party." Caleb gave her the faintest of smiles, just a twitch of the mouth. Could have gone worse. Could have gone quieter, too. They spent the rest of the day burying the dead. Caleb helped all bodies. Didn't matter whether the man wore a badge or a scar. He helped all the same. Said a few words, short and honest, over each one. Didn't feel like victory. Felt like survival. And that was plenty. Lomax was long gone, riding east under the weight of his own shame. Caleb figured the man wouldn't last the winter. Outlaws like him didn't handle being beaten by the law, much less by a kid with storm eyes and a soul full of old gun smoke. That night, the saloon filled again, not with drinking and dancing, but quiet conversation and slow piano chords. Ellie served coffee, not whiskey. Miss Martha from the bakery brought pies. Folks sat close, shoulders touching, like they needed to feel one another still breathing. Caleb didn't go. He sat alone in the jailhouse, lamp burning low, hands wrapped round a mug gone cold. His duster hung on the peg behind him. His badge lay on the desk, dull in the lamplight. He stared at it a long while, like it was a relic from a life he'd never asked for. Then the door creaked open. Lena stepped in, her boots soft on the floorboards. She held a fresh plate, biscuits, eggs, thick-cut bacon, the good stuff. "Thought you might need something warm," she said. Caleb nodded. "You always bring breakfast at midnight." "Only for folk who nearly get themselves killed." He took the plate, but didn't eat right away. "You leaving?" "Eventually. Not tonight." "Why not?" Lena shrugged. "Same reason you stayed in this town, I reckon. Feels unfinished." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that don't ask for conversation. Then Caleb spoke. "I used to think being fast meant something. That if you could draw quicker, shoot straighter, you could make things right." Lena looked at him, her gaze gentle but firm. "And now I think it just means you're the last one standing at the funeral." She didn't argue, just nodded slow. "Maybe. But sometimes the last one standing's the only one who can build something new." Caleb looked down at the badge on the desk, reached out, picked it up, brushed the dust from its face. Outside, the stars shimmered like frost on glass, and the wind blew soft across the empty street. Whiskey Ridge had survived, and so had its sheriff. A week passed. Then another. Whiskey Ridge began to breathe again. The children played in the dusty streets. Miss Clara reopened the schoolhouse. The preacher fixed the steeple bell, and Ellie even restocked the saloon with a new shipment of bourbon that hadn't been touched since before the war. Caleb Bryce, though, stayed the same, steady, quiet, always watching. The town might have healed, but the man who held it together carried the weight like a saddle that never came off. One morning, just after sunrise, he stood on the hill behind the church, hat in hand, fastened 5 fresh graves. Simple wood markers. No names carved, just notches, 'cause there weren't enough time nor kin to do better. You fought, he whispered, and you stayed. That counts. He tipped his hat once, then walked back toward town. That same afternoon, a horse came down the trail. Not a dust cloud, not a gang. Just one rider. No sound but the wind and the soft crunch of hooves on gravel. The man was tall, wrapped in a black coat, with a brimmed hat pulled low. His horse was lean, dark gray, with a limp in its back leg like it had seen better days. He didn't stop at the general store. Didn't tie up outside the saloon. He rode straight to the jail. Caleb met him on the porch, one hand on the rail, the other near his holster. "You lost?" Caleb asked. The man didn't answer right away. Just swung down from the saddle, slow and easy. His face was rough, worn. Not young, not old, just spent, like a man who'd been riding so long. He forgot what rest felt like. "No," he said finally. "I'm looking for a man." Caleb's jaw tensed. "Ain't most folks." The man stepped closer. "You ever hear the name Cain Ror?" That name settled over the porch like a thundercloud. Caleb didn't answer. Didn't have to. Cain Ror. That was a name out of the past. The kind of name that echoed through saloons and bounty ledgers, usually followed by words like slaughter or escaped. The man on the porch met Caleb's gaze square. "He's my brother." Now that shifted things. The silence stretched long. Finally, Caleb said, "You come to find him or bury him?" "I came to warn you," the man said. "He's coming. Heard what happened with Lomax. Cain figures if a boy sheriff can take down Bart, he wants the crown for himself." Caleb's fingers brushed the edge of his belt. "Why tell me?" "Because Cain Ror ain't just an outlaw. He's a ghost in spurs, and you're gonna need more than fast hands to stop him." He turned then, mounted up again, and rode off without another word. No name, no direction, just dust in the wind and a promise of hell on the horizon. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He oiled his gun slow, like a man polishing old memories. The badge gleamed beside him, and the lamp burned low. Somewhere out there, Cain Ror was coming. And Caleb Bryce, the fastest shot this side of the Rockies, would be waiting. 3 days passed. Every sunrise brought whispers. Folks swore they'd seen a lone figure out by the bluffs, or a dark horse drinking from the creek at dusk. One boy claimed he'd found boot prints by the churchyard, prints wider and deeper than any local wore. Cain Ror was close. You could feel it in your teeth, like the pressure before a lightning strike. Caleb waited. He didn't pace, didn't fret. He just went about his business, checking on fences, standing, watch at the jail, nodding to townsfolk who nodded back with tight smiles and nervous eyes. The badge felt heavier these days. Not from the metal, from what it meant. On the 4th night, Lena returned. She rode in after dark, her coat dusted with road grime, and her eyes sharp as the edge of a Bowie knife. "He's camped 5 miles north," she said, breathless. "Alone. No gang, no backup." Caleb stood from his desk, holster slung low, gun clean and ready. "You sure it's him?" She nodded. Cain Ror wears a buffalo hide coat and has a scar that runs from his ear to his collar. "It's him." Caleb didn't speak right away. Just strapped on his belt, buckled it tight, then looked her in the eye. "This town ain't built for the storm he'll bring." Lena stepped forward. "Then let's not wait for it to hit the town." They rode out together at first light. The trail north was quiet, but not peaceful. No birds sang. No coyotes howled. The land held its breath. By the time they reached the ridge, The sun was hanging low and mean. They dismounted in silence and moved through the brush on foot. The fire came into view first, small, steady, surrounded by stones blackened from years of use. Cain Ror sat cross-legged, back to the flames, head bowed like he was praying. But there was no holiness in that posture, just stillness, like a snake coiled in wait. He spoke without looking up. "Been expecting you." Caleb stepped forward, Lena a few paces behind. Cain lifted his head, and Caleb saw the face that had haunted bounty ledgers for years. The scar was worse than he imagined. Deep ragged. A map of violence. "You came alone," Cain said. "Didn't expect that." "I ain't alone," Caleb replied. "Not in any way that counts." Cain smiled. "You're the boy who put down Bart Lomax. Made the papers. Got folks talking, like you're something other than bones and breath." "I'm just a sheriff," Caleb said, hand near his holster. "And you're just a man who's run too long." Cain's smile widened. "I'm the storm boy, and you ain't ready for rain." Without warning, he drew. Fast. But Caleb was faster. 2 shots cracked like whip cracks in a canyon. 1 from each. Cain staggered, clutching his side, blood spilling between his fingers. Caleb stood firm, a graze on his shoulder burning, but he didn't flinch. Cain laughed, a low, ragged sound. "You really are fast." Caleb stepped forward, gun steady. "But I ain't just fast." He kicked Cain's revolver away. "You could kill me." Cain wheezed. "Be a hero." Caleb shook his head. "Heroes don't fire on a man already fallen." Cain looked up, eyes gleaming with some strange mixture of pain and respect. "Then you ain't what I expected either." Lena moved in, rifle raised but not aimed. "You done?" Cain didn't answer, just leaned back, eyes on the sky, and whispered, "I was done a long time ago." Cain Ror didn't die that night. He bled, sure, enough to fill a saddlebag, but Lena wrapped his side tight, and Caleb built a travois out of pine poles and saddle leather. They dragged him back to Whiskey Ridge slow, leaving a trail through the dust like a serpent marking its last road. When they rolled into town, the streets went quiet. Ellie stood on the boardwalk, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Others peeked from windows. Caleb didn't stop to explain. He just hauled the outlaw into the jail, locked him in the back cell, and stood outside the bars with a weight in his chest he couldn't name. "You could have left me to die," Cain rasped from the cot. "Could have," Caleb said. "Didn't." "Why?" Caleb leaned on the bars. "Because I don't want my badge to mean killing. I want it to mean justice." Cain snorted. "Then you're in the wrong land." That night, Caleb sat with the town council. If you could call 3 storekeepers and a widowed preacher a council, they argued about what to do. Some said hang him. Others wanted to send him to the next county for trial. Lena spoke up from the corner. "He came here for blood, and the sheriff gave him mercy. Maybe the town ought to follow suit." Ellie nodded. "You hang him. You don't stop the violence. You feed it." Caleb didn't speak. He just watched the flame dance in the oil lamp, thinking on all the graves he'd filled, and the ones he might still have to. By morning, they made their choice. Cain Ror was to be handed over to the circuit judge, a week's ride east. Trial in a real court. No noose by mob. Just law. And that's when the vultures came. A rider, young, breathless, burst into town just past noon. "There's men coming," he shouted. 10 of them, maybe more. Askin for Cain Ror. Caleb's jaw tensed. They armed, like a cavalry unit. The Outlaws' old gang, or the ones left. Men who'd followed Cain from Arizona to Wyoming, leaving behind wreckage and rumors. They'd caught wind their old leader was in chains, and they were coming to finish what Cain couldn't. Caleb walked into the jail, stood in front of the cell. Cain sat up, pale but smiling. "Told you I was the storm." "You ain't the storm," Caleb said. "You're the bait." Cain's smile faded. Outside, townsfolk gathered. Some gripped rifles. Others packed wagons, looking to run. But most waited for Caleb to speak. He climbed the steps of the church, faced the crowd. "We've faced devils before," he said. "Lomax, the Ror gang, and we stood our ground." He held up the badge. "This don't shine because it's polished. It shines because it's been tested. And if they come here for Cain, they'll learn what all the others did. This town don't scare easy. The people didn't cheer, didn't shout, but they stayed. That night, Caleb sat on the jailhouse porch, rifle in his lap, hat low over his eyes. And somewhere out there, the gang was riding. The sun hadn't yet climbed the hills when the outlaws came. 10 of them, maybe more, shadows against the blood-red sky. They rode in silent, rifles strapped across their backs, faces wrapped in kerchiefs. Men who'd followed Cain Ror into canyons where lawmen feared to tread. And now they wanted him back, or they wanted revenge. But they weren't riding into an empty town. From the roof of the saloon, Ellie cocked her rifle. From behind the mercantile, Lena crouched low, revolvers drawn. The blacksmith and his apprentice held the left flank, and Miss Claire's boys guarded the church steeple with their daddy's old carbine. And in the middle of the street, Sheriff Caleb Bryce waited. Alone. Cain Ror watched from his cell window, jaw clenched. The gang rode slow down Main Street, eyeing the windows, the roofs, the doors. They expected fear. They got silence. Their leader, a grizzled brute named Stokes, reined in his horse 10 paces from Caleb. "You got Cain," he called. "Hand him over. Walk away." Caleb didn't move. "You hear me, boy?" "I hear you," Caleb said, voice like gravel on stone. "But I ain't handing over justice to a pack of murderers." Stokes sneered. "You'll die for him?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. "No, I'll live for this town." Then came the first shot. Not from Caleb, not from the gang, but from Ellie's Winchester. It dropped a man clean off his horse. And with that, the street erupted. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Dust flew in every direction. The outlaws returned fire, but the townsfolk were dug in, fighting not for gold or glory, but for each other. Caleb moved like lightning, ducking low, firing clean. His shots were true, never wasted. He dropped 3 men in less than a minute, dancing through smoke like a ghost made of grit. Lena flanked left, her pistols barking with rhythm. One outlaw screamed, clutching his leg. Another fell backward, never to rise again. By the time the sun cleared the hills, it was over. Stokes lay bleeding in the dirt, his pistol a few feet from his hand. Caleb walked up slow, gun at the ready. "You want to pick that up?" he asked. Stokes coughed, spat blood. "Go to hell." Caleb holstered his iron. "Already been. Didn't like the company." Cain Ror watched the whole thing from behind iron bars. When the door creaked open and Caleb stepped inside, the outlaw didn't speak right away. Finally he said, "You saved me." "No," Caleb replied. "I saved them from you, from what you bring." Cain nodded, slow. "So now what?" "You stand trial. Like any man should." 3 days later, a U.S. Marshal rode in and took Cain Ror into custody. No blood, no bullets. Just handcuffs and paperwork. Justice done clean. The town of Whiskey Ridge buried 3 that week. 2 townsfolk, 1 outlaw who'd surrendered and died from his wounds. The preacher said prayers. Ellie poured drinks. Life went on. And Caleb Bryce? He stood at the edge of town one evening, star pinned firm to his chest, eyes on the horizon. Lena stepped up beside him, hat low over her brow. "You ever gonna rest?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not while men like Cain still ride." "You're not the boy sheriff anymore," she said. "You're something else now." He didn't answer, but as the wind blew soft through the streets of Whiskey Ridge, folks knew they were safe. Because their sheriff wasn't just the fastest gun this side of the Rockies. He was the kind of man who didn't run, and the kind of man outlaws feared to meet at dawn.